Thank you. Um, so I'm Eric Gonon, I'm the CTO for Digital and Application Innovation at Microsoft France CSU.
Mark Weitzel, I'm a principal architect at Microsoft in our Azure developer division, working on our Azure SDKs.
So the agenda of today, we'll start by the context, where we are on API world and where we are on apps world. We will have new elements. Right now, we already have new elements. So we end up with a problem, and a huge problem, that we have to tackle. And for that, hopefully we have new paradigms that will maybe lead to a solution. And this solution will provide a new vision of APIs. That's the agenda that I proposed for this morning. First, the context. You know that we have today around 500 million of applications running. That's what we've done for the last 40 years. And that's a huge number of apps. When I say apps, it's apps and microservices and so on. It's all app. On the other side, we have, in 2022, an API maturity, and a high level of maturity for APIs. But today, we still have APIs only for engineers. So that's the landscape of today. Maybe Mark, you can provide some more insight about that.
Certainly, and we saw in the keynote just a little while ago, Mark O'Neill was talking about really the rise and the growth of APIs as well, not just external APIs, but also internal APIs, and that's certainly one of the things we're seeing also.
And that's some examples of what is in a REST API with OpenAPI definition, and that's a graph about the number of apps during the last 50 years up to 2023. We have new elements. That's something very important to consider. We have on the IT space to double the number of apps, but not in 40 years, but in 4 years. That's a huge new element. And how we can do that, that's a question today. We also have an issue with software complexity. Software complexity is not the linear stuff. Today it's more an exponential stuff. And that's not good in IT. As you know, we prefer to have logarithmic stuff than exponential. But that's the current world. And we also have new dimension to consider. It's not just my business goal or my technical goal. It's also how I will be sustainable when I will provide the business goal. And that's a new topic for us. As examples, I just found on the Washington University the number of lines of code for an airplane during the last 50 years. And as you see, it's not linear stuff. And we have today something very complex just for an airplane. And you can map that to multiple industries and multiple businesses. On the right, we have some key to change the mindset between working hard and working smart. Because we cannot provide more developers or more effort to sustain the complexity. So we have to change the mindset of software development and API consumption. And that's the same graph, but as you can see, we will have very soon a big issue with the number of apps. So that leads to all these problems. And on top of that, because we are engineers, we love to learn new technology and to add new technology inside the landscape. And at the end, we have something like that for the CNCF. And you have fresh new technology every week or every day. We change a lot of stuff. We have not always a consensus about new technology, but we just provide a new technology and hope that the technology will solve some stuff. That's sometimes true, sometimes not. So we have to handle that. On the same part, we have some facts. about the number of developers, worldwide we have about 40 million developers right now. All up. So when I say 40 developers, 40 million developers, not just pro code dev, it's also low code users and non-engineers. Today, we already have a shortage about number of developers. We consider that we must have around 60 million developers to do and to create all the apps, APIs, and microservices and so on worldwide. But we are stuck at the 43 million developers worldwide. So that's the main issue that we have today. And in the next 3 years, we will have more and more discrepancy between the number of developers that we hope and that we have really. That's the main issue. Hopefully, we have new paradigms since few years. And I think that's very important to consider that we have AI everywhere. When I say everywhere, it's not just for guys that are doing AI today, but also for you when you use Outlook or Office 365. We improve your experience by including AI inside PowerPoint, inside Outlook, and so on. If you use Visual Studio, we improve your developer velocity by adding AI inside Visual Studio. So you will be more efficient and you will have a better velocity just by being more than just a human creating code. You create code with the machine, with the AI stuff. We have the new era, but it's not new, but we have a new momentum around low-code stuff. We can do some stuff with the low-code without having the pro dev knowledge. So that's useful for us as we still have around 40 million developers. We will focus these developers to pro dev code, and we will have business users or citizen users that will do some sort of code with the machine, with the low-code platform, and up to the no-code if it will work well soon. Hopefully, on the other side, on the pro dev stuff, we have a new language for designing APIs, so that will help the velocity of creating APIs.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about Cattle. One of the things I do at Microsoft is I run our API stewardship board. So we work across all of our Azure service teams to help them build better APIs that are very developer friendly. And one of the things that we found is, Open API, the Open API specification, it drives our pipeline. It's very key to what we do. But managing and authoring those things at scale across large distributed teams is quite challenging. So we've been looking at a way to solve some of those problems, to make things more reusable, to be able to share things more like we share code, like models and resources and things like that. And also to think about how we can structure or think about or help developers really think about what their API looks like, not sort of wrestling with the semantics or the mechanics of very large open API documents. And so we've been experimenting and now working with a language that we've called Cattle. That name will change in a little bit, but you can think of like TypeSpec is to JavaScript. You can think of Cattle the same way to Open API. It really helps to bring a developer experience to creating Open API documents. And we really think about this as a way to help developers focus and design their APIs, focus on the core concepts. And because it's a language, it really gets this wonderful code support or IntelliSense and things like that, tooling support naturally, kind of out of the box. And we're able to take this language and implement our REST API guidelines. And for folks that are running API practices inside of their organization, I'm sure you've published your guidelines and say, this is what you can do, and you can lint a lot of those things. But I bet as you look at the APIs, if I get like shows of hands here, I bet you can tell when a team hasn't really studied your API guidelines or understands your API guidelines. And Cattle allows us to really encapsulate what those things do. And so what we're able to do with Cattle is take our guidelines and encapsulate them. And there's a couple of blog posts that we've just put out that talk about two things. One is how you would go off and encapsulate your rules and guidelines inside of a library, and that shows some motivation behind that. And then I thought it was very interesting the keynote was talking about Mastodon, because we actually took the Mastodon API and created that in Cattle, got it down to about 80 lines or so of Cattle code, which then generated out about 4,000 lines of open API. So you can really start to see the difference in complexity there. So we're really excited about it. It's been fun working on it, and yeah, I'll talk more about it if you want. So,
thank you. So hopefully we think that we have a solution for the problem that we have today. Or if you don't have this problem today, you will have it tomorrow. We think that we can apply AI and AI models to cross-software communications. Today we applied AI in the code, in the applications, and in the world everywhere around us. But APIs are still like 20 years ago or maybe 30 years ago. It's still a stuff for engineers for machine-to-machine communication. But because we are in the world where APIs are everywhere, we have to think a little bit differently. And because developers right now are not just developers, but are citizen developers, so you have to embed AI inside the API. We end up with a new way of thinking APIs. It's not APIs by just a contract. We still have a contract because it's an API, but the contract is not on what kind of parameters I will have, what kind of answer, what is my business domain, and so on. It's just a capability-oriented APIs, like the capability-oriented architectures, where you define what I'm able to do, what I'm able to answer, based on intent. That's the main shift. It's intent-based and not parameter-based, and not just contract-based. The vision, when we have that, then we can apply a new vision. If it's a capability-oriented API, you have an intent, and an intent, it's more human-readable stuff instead of machine-readable stuff. Because when you communicate with a human and another human, you don't have to predefine how I will communicate with you, what will be the parameters that I will send to you, what will be the questions that we'll be able to answer. I just try, and maybe you will have an answer, maybe not the right answer, but you will have something that will fit your question. And we have the malleable stuff, because if you start a conversation between two humans, maybe you start with an English conversation, then you switch to French because you are both French, and then you switch to the whiteboard because you prefer to use the whiteboard to exchange information instead of keeping the first approach with the oral communication in English. So we have some sort of auto-tune around the protocol itself. Today we have to predefine which protocol I will use for the communication, and then when I establish the protocol, then I can have a conversation. You don't have to pre-establish something. You just have to say, okay, that's inside my capability, and as a client, I will ask to the server for this specific capability stuff. When we have that, we can have a sort of marketplace around the capabilities, and then we can apply a global search engine, because today, if you apply a search engine on contract, on API contract, you will end up with a fragmentation of your API world space. Not with capability, because we have, of course, it's a vision, so we don't have the exact answer today. So you have to consider how you will define a capability. And when we have an open API specification for capability stuff, then you can plug it inside the marketplace and inside a search engine. We also have to introduce something like a Yuka. If you know Yuka, Yuka is for is it LC or not to eat something. Somewhere you have to apply that for APIs, because in a sustainable IT, you have to know before asking a question or before requiring some stuff, is the stuff sustainable or not? So sort of Yuka, but dynamic Yuka, not a static Yuka, because Yuka depends of the day, of the weather or something like that, and depends of the electricity carbon footprint and so on. And then when we have all that stuff, we can apply APIs for citizen developers. And that will provide a lot more usage around APIs, because we still keep the API world and API ecosystem, but we will apply it to citizen developers. And of course, because it's capability-based, you can change on the fly between the first capability and the same sort of capability, but maybe not the same precise answers that you will have. I have examples of capability-oriented APIs. When you ask for the weather forecast, today you can ask to an API, please give me the temperature for the next 2 days in Paris, France. That's some sort of regular API that you have. But if I ask the same question in French, maybe because I'm in the context, a specific context, I will answer with a temperature in Celsius and not in Fahrenheit, because I have a boundary context. So that's a little bit more difficult to do it today, and I will be able to understand the answer. But if I have a capability-oriented API, and I have a specific question, a very precise question like, I would like the answer in Kelvin, I would like the answer for tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., and I would like it for specific latitude and longitude. That's the latitude and longitude of Paris. I will maybe have a very specific answer because I need a specific question and answer. So it's exactly the same capability. The capabilities provide the weather forecast, plus the weather forecast in France and in which kind of weather. Because weather, it's not an IT stuff. It's more human stuff. When you say weather, is it rainy? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it exact the percentage of humidity? That's a different story. And if I ask, what will be the weather for tomorrow, or do I need to bring my umbrella for tonight? That's also a weather capability, but completely different story. And at the end, you can apply what you do with your home assistant inside the API. We have to define how we will communicate between the client and the server and the client, because maybe it will be a conversation. You will ask something to the capability-oriented APIs, and capability-oriented API will say, but you forgot to provide me the city. So maybe I'm inside the specific context, so I know the city, but maybe I'm not inside the context, so I don't know the city. We think that it's not far-fetched. And that's the main topic, because we think, okay, apply API and APIs and so on, AI and APIs. But if you think very well about what we do today regarding Copilot, on Copilot, you have an intent-based code generation. You say, in Copilot, you say, maybe it's not very good with the lights, but create an API with the answer on the GET request on the /weather forecast, and you return the list of weather forecast with open API documentation. And boom, you have the code for a specific map GET /weather forecast route, and then you have a Lambda that will provide a random weather forecast based on the summaries I have on the top, and then provide and produce the open API specification. I just provided an intent. I never provided to the Visual Studio. I would like a map get stuff on the specific parameters for the next days, and please add this open API stuff. No, you just have the intent. So at the end, you can create code, and maybe you will be able to consume APIs without having the knowledge of the engineers. So that's the end of the story for capability-oriented APIs. So right now, if you have some questions, we have an open mic for 5 minutes.
Thank you. What was the Yucca-like metrics that you mentioned on that slide? What's that? What's a Yucca or a Yucca?
Yucca. The idea is to have some sort of external provider that will evaluate the carbon impact that you have for your IT system. And the idea is that today we provide the contract for our API and saying that's my business domain, that's the parameters and that's the answers. But we also have to provide an API for the API itself. If you will consume myself, I will maybe generate X grams of CO2 because I'm Rhino based in France and it's good. And if my API it's hosted in Germany, it's bad because it's call generation today. So maybe you will change the provider, the API provider, and you will not consume your regular partner for APIs, but you will consume another capability-oriented APIs on another country with a better, with a less impact around the climate. That Yuka, maybe it's a French app for that we can just scan the barcode on a specific object, and you will have a green, yellow, and red light.
So it's basically environmental kind of.
Yeah, yeah. So the idea is that we have to reduce our impact on the environment. So how we can standardize some stuff like that, and we have the Green Software Foundation that already done the job for defining the carbon impact and defining the common set of parameters when you ask to an API or an app what is the carbon impact of the API. It's just that if you have a capability-oriented APIs, you can compare two APIs. That's not true with the APIs that we consume today, because you will not be able to change on the fly the API. So that's why with this new vision, we can add more features like the Yuka.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Any other question? No? I may have one.
Uh-huh.
You were talking about the discussion that people have
Yeah.
before diving into actually creating the API. How do you record that discussion which happen in natural language and that have to be transformed into an API? Are you using specific formats, tools, or nothing?
We don't have the question right now because it's just a vision. We don't have tools, or we don't have specification for that. So that's some sort of questions that we have to answer. Like for the security stuff, because it's a conversation, how do I protect my API? Today, with parameters, it's easy. With a conversation, how do you know that it's not a good conversation and you must not answer to that? Or maybe I will change your behavior based on our conversation, because you will learn something and you will apply it to the next conversation. So we have pending questions for sure.
Okay. So for those who are struggling with that, the only option to store that conversation is still a good old wiki. And maybe you can ask, put the content and feed it to Copilot or ChatGPT, and it will maybe generate some code.
Yes,
Okay.
that's ideas, yes.
Thank you very much. Warm applause for the speaker.